First introduced in the final stages of World War II, the T-44 was designed as the intended successor to the iconic T-34. While it offered significant improvements over its predecessor, production challenges prevented the T-44 from entering frontline service, and it ultimately saw no combat service during the war. Despite efforts to upgrade its firepower, the T-44 retained the same 85mm gun found on the T-34-85, as fitting a larger weapon proved problematic. The T-44 was soon overshadowed by its direct successor, the T-54, which was officially adopted in 1946. As a result, the tank was relegated to secondary roles, and its presence was largely kept under wraps during the Cold War. However, by the 1960s, the Soviet Union began efforts to modernize its aging T-44 fleet. One particularly ambitious effort came in 1964 with the development of the T-44MS, an upgrade that represented what could be considered the ultimate evolution of the secretive Cold War tank. The T-44 was the product of several wartime attempts to improve upon the legendary T-34, many of which had been delayed or cancelled due to the Soviet Union's strained wartime conditions. By late 1944, the T-44A prototype was accepted for service, offering notable advancements over its predecessor. However, production was hampered by a lack of skilled labor, incomplete technical documentation, and the devastated state of Plant No. 75 in Kharkov, where it was intended to be built. As a result, the T-44 never saw combat during the war. While it retained the same 85mm ZIS S-53 gun found on the T-34-85, the Red Army was already seeking greater firepower. Efforts to arm the T-44 with a 100mm gun began in October 1944, leading to the development of the T-44-100 prototypes. These, however, struggled with limited turret space and cramped conditions inside. Simultaneously, another project, initially called T-44P, focused on a more extensive redesign, ultimately evolving into the T-54. By January 1945, the first T-54 prototype was completed. Accepted into service by 1946, the T-54 marked a clean break from its predecessors and would go on to become one of the most iconic and widely used tanks of the Cold War. Though the T-54 officially replaced the T-44 when production began in 1947, the older tank wasn't entirely sidelined. Nearly 2,000 T-44s had been built, and its solid core design remained competitive. In the 1960s, rather than retire the aging fleet, the Soviet Union initiated a modernization program, resulting in the T-44M in 1961. This upgraded variant brought the T-44 in line with USSR's early Cold War standards and extended its service life. Key changes included replacing the original T-34 style tracks, drive sprockets, and road wheels with components from the T-54. The outdated V-44 engine was swapped for the more powerful V-54, and significant improvements were made to the transmission, addressing persistent reliability issues found in both the T-44 and early T-54 models. These upgrades gave the T-44M mobility on par with its successor and introduced a level of parts commonality between the two. Despite the updates introduced to the T-44M, Soviet engineers continued searching for ways to further improve the vehicle. In the spring of 1964, the 115th Kharkov Armor Repair Plant began modifying two T-44M tanks into new experimental models. These prototypes, designated T-44MS, featured a range of additional improvements aimed at keeping the tank relevant in the evolving landscape of the Cold War battlefield. One of the most significant upgrades to the T-44MS was the addition of the STP-2 Cyclone two-plane gun stabilizer, the same system used on the T-54B and T-55. This stabilizer greatly improved firing accuracy on the move, giving the gunner main control, yet allowing the commander access to stabilized horizontal traverse. However, the addition came with trade-offs. The gun's elevation range was reduced to -3° depression and +17° elevation, compared to the original T-44's -5° and +20°. While seemingly minor, a depression angle of just -3° severely limited the tank's ability to fire from hull-down positions. A second prototype improved this slightly with -4° of depression. The STP-2 also introduced variable traverse speeds from as slow as 0.07 degree per second to as fast as 4.5 degree, with elevation and depression rates reaching 15 degree per second. The second prototype also introduced two stabilization modes, fully stabilized and semi-automatic, the latter offering powered movement without stabilization. Additionally, the gunner's controls were repositioned forward, along with other adjustments to improve space and crew ergonomics within the turret. The first T-44MS prototype underwent trials at the NIIPT Proving Grounds in March 1964, where several improvements were suggested. Notably, the TSH-16 telescopic sight, originally used on the T-3485, was deemed inadequate for use with the new stabilizer system. As a result, it was recommended that it be replaced with a more modern TSH-2B sight, which was standard on the T-55 and better suited for stabilized firing. The second T-44MS prototype was equipped with night vision systems for both the commander and gunner. The commander's station received a TKN-1 pattern sight paired with an OU-3 infrared searchlight mounted on the cupola. Their searchlight was connected to the sight by a rod, allowing it to tilt in sync with the commander's line of sight. Originally developed for the T-54 and produced by the Photo Prelad complex in Ukraine, the TKN-1 offered a 10-degree field of view and effective range of 250 to 300 meters at speeds of up to 25 kilometers per hour in combat conditions. The gunner's station was upgraded with the TPN-1 Luna night sight, replacing the previous periscope. Manufactured by the Izium instrument making plant, the TPN-1 provided magnification from 0.3 times to 3.5 times and a minimum observation distance of 400 meters in daylight and 300 meters at night with infrared illumination. To support it, an L2 infrared searchlight was mounted near the gun mantlet. These devices did not amplify ambient light, but operated using active infrared illumination. Infrared beams from the OU-3, L2, and FG-102 headlights reflected off surfaces and were captured through each sight's objective lens, and then enhanced by an image intensifier, enabling nighttime visibility for the crew. As the T-44MS was based on existing T-44 hulls, it retained the same armor layout found on the earlier T-44A and T-44M variants, consisting of rolled homogeneous welded plates and cast steel. The thickest protection was concentrated at the front, with the upper and lower glacis plates measuring 90mm thick and sloped at 60 and 45 degrees respectively, offering a substantial improvement over the T-34's frontal armor. However, by the 1960s, this armor was no longer sufficient against modern anti-tank threats such as high-velocity APDS rounds and heat shells. Still, tank design philosophy had begun shifting away from relying solely on thick armor, placing greater emphasis on mobility and eventually on advanced protection like composite and reactive armor. The hull sights were 75mm thick with minimal sloping, save for a narrow section near the bottom angled at 60 degrees. At the rear, the hull featured three plates, upper and lower 30mm plates sloped at 60 and 70 degrees, and a central 45mm plate sloped at 17 degrees. The hull roof was 20mm thick with a 15mm floor. The turret, though visually reminiscent of the T-3485's, was a more refined cast design, lacking the older tank's raised neck due to a lower engine deck, which reduced its profile and removed a structural weak point. The turret front and mantlet were both 120mm thick and curved. The sights were 90mm at a 20-degree angle, the rear 75mm at 70 degrees, and both the turret and cupola roofs were 15mm thick. The T-44MS used the same V54 12-cylinder 520 horsepower diesel engine as the T-54, mounted transversely at the rear, a major improvement over the T-34's layout. It saved space and allowed a more compact design. Weighing around 32.5 tons, the T-44MS could reach a top speed of 57 km per hour. The T-44MS retained the T-44M suspension, nearly identical to the T-54's. It featured rear drive sprockets, front idlers, and 5 large rubber-rimmed road wheels per side on torsion bars. This torsion bar system, running through the whole floor, saved space compared to the bulkier Christie suspension of the T-34. The T-44MS retained the 85mm ZIS S-53 gun, also used on earlier T-44 variants, Comparable to the German 88mm KWK-36 and the US 90mm M3, it fired AP shells at 793 meters per second. Ammunition included UO365K HE, UPR-365 and UPR-365K APHE, and limited UPR-365PK APCR rounds. Post-war improvements introduced more powerful UPR-367 APHE and UPR-367P APCR shells. By 1964, the gun could also fire 3 PK2 Heat FS rounds, capable of penetrating 300 to 350 mm of armor at any range, significantly improving the combat effectiveness of vehicles still equipped with the ZIS-53. The T-44MS was armed with two 7.62x54 Arctic TRF-DT machine guns, each with a rate of fire around 550 rounds per minute. One was coaxial with the main gun, while the other was fixed in the hull beside the driver. Due to the redesigned mantlet, the coaxial gun was mounted through a slot in the turret's frontal armor. Though uncommon post-war, fixed-hull MGs remained in use on some Soviet tanks like the T-44MS. The T-44MS had a four-man crew. The driver sat at the front left of the hull, responsible for driving and operating a fixed electronically fired hull machine gun. In the turret, the gunner sat on the left, aiming and firing both the main gun and coaxial machine gun, with the commander positioned directly behind him. The commander identified targets, issued orders, and operated the radio. On the right side of the turret sat the loader, who reloaded the main gun and machine gun. This traditional crew layout allowed for efficient coordination and operation during combat and was standard for most modern tank designs. The first T-44MS prototype began testing at the NIPT Proving Grounds in March 1964. Mechanically, the tank performed well, with no major issues reported during trials. However, several improvements were recommended. The original gunner's sight proved inadequate for use with a stabilizer and was recommended to be replaced with a modern THH-2B sight. Additionally, the limited internal space, particularly around the gunner's station, was noted as a serious concern affecting crew comfort and efficiency. These issues led to several changes in the second T-44MS prototype. The gunner's position was significantly revised, his controls and turret rotation mechanism were moved forward, a footrest was added, and the gun shield on his side was removed, with its folding mechanism relocated to the loader's side. The stabilizer now had two modes, fully stabilized and semi-automatic. Gun depression was slightly improved to -4 degrees. Most notably, night vision equipment and infrared searchlight were installed for both the commander and the gunner. The second prototype underwent testing from June 15th to August 30th, 1964. Results showed a 2% improvement in firing accuracy on the move, attributed to the gunner's improved ergonomics. At some stage, the tank was also tested with underwater driving equipment. Despite its upgrades, the tank's cramped interior remained a major issue, especially the loader's access to the ammunition racks. This unresolved issue ultimately led to the cancellation of the T-44MS program. At least one prototype was later sent to Kubinka, where it was restored to running condition in 2015. Upgrading older tanks is a common practice, especially given the significant cost and time required to produce a new vehicle. The T-44MS program successfully modernized two T-44 tanks, but many of the same space and ergonomic limitations seen in the earlier T-44-100 reappeared. While the upgrades performed adequately, they simply did not justify the resources required for full-scale adoption. In a total war scenario, such upgrades might have been worthwhile, but by the 1960s, the Soviet Union had no pressing need to modernize these outdated tanks. As a result, the T-44MS remained only a minor chapter in Cold War tank development. This concluded our look at the rare and secretive T-44MS tank. What do you think of this heavily modified T-44? Would it have stood a chance if the Cold War had turned hot? Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters, Baron Gunther, Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Schubert, Leslie Hookover, Michael Herman, Owen M., R. Rob, and Subwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.